Hello, everyone. We are rolling for another episode of the JJF1 podcast, where Jonah and Jordan talk about all things related to F1. Today, we have a content episode for you. It's not a race review, something that we're going to call Who's In, Who's Out. We have two drivers each that we're going to name of who we think should leave F1 and who we think should come into F1. So good afternoon, Jordan. We are on a 5-hour time difference right now. I'm very curious to see who you're gonna kick out of F1 and who you're gonna bring in.
Yeah, well, I think there are some more obvious ones that are really hyped up and talked about a lot of in the mainstream media. And I think we're both going to hit those ones. But I think there are some that are not talked about. I think there's some that really deserve a seat that are not talked about enough, even though they have all the accolades in the world. So I think the who's in, it's always great to talk about who's next in Formula One. We always look to the future in Formula One. It's really going to be unfortunate to talk about who's out in Formula One and the reasons why they would be out. And I think you'll be a little surprised at who I think is going to be out next in Formula One.
Okay, well, you know what? We're going to start with out first. So I want to hear what your first driver who you are going to kick out of Formula One.
Well, I don't think I'm going to kick him out of Formula One. I think he's going to voluntarily leave Formula One. And it is none other than the 7-time world champion, Lewis Hamilton.
You think he's going to leave?
I think he will leave. If this year, again, I'm going to stick with my prediction. I think Mercedes has the personnel and the mechanics and engineers. They have the right staff in order to develop their car properly for the coming races, especially at the end of the season. And I think that, like they normally do, can make a late season push for the constructors. I think that Lewis Hamilton, because of his team behind him and their late push, can also make a push for the drivers if he maintains a close standing in the drivers' championship. And he's, one race he did a good job of getting down those limitations. Let's see what he could pull off in the next couple races if he could do the same thing. I think he has a chance at becoming the 8th world title. Not if it's not this year, it might be next. But I think within the next 2 years, he will be voluntarily leaving Formula One. Again, we have to remember he also has a contract for 2 years now. He's Lewis Hamilton. He can leave whenever he wants, but it's 2 years. So in theory, he might leave in 2 years at the least or at the most. Who knows? But I think he will be the next person to leave Formula One. And I think it will be out of complete I think it will be his own will that will drive him out of
walking out on his own terms, you mean?
Exactly.
I mean, wow. I mean, I completely flew over my head when I was writing this down. I didn't even think about that because Lewis Hamilton has been such a mainstay in Formula One. He's been in Formula One since I was 7 years old. So that is like 2/3 of my life ago, he was in F1. But I mean, I think everything comes to an end, and I don't think it's going to be in 2 years from now. I think he's still going to push, unless this year is absolutely horrible for him, and then I think he's going to leave. But what do you think? Do you think that if he doesn't win this year, or if everything goes really bad and he manages to end up 5th or 6th in the championship, do you think he ends up leaving this year?
I think it has to be worse than 5th or 6th in the championship. But I do think that is the limit for him. I do think that if things go absolutely terribly and he is a very smart man, if he sees no future for the success of the Mercedes AMG Formula One team, I think he will call it a day. And it will be just like Tom Brady's retirement, where it's going to be a retirement that's celebrated. His fake retirement, let's say.
Yeah, it wasn't even a retirement. He came back 6 weeks later.
when he will retire, it'll be one of those retirements that will be celebrated all over the world. And I think that there will be nothing but positive things to say when he does retire. But yeah, so given that, I think that do we talk about who's next, who replaces him, or do we get to?
No, we're gonna go out first and then in next.
Right. Let's do it.
My first out is gonna be Nicholas Latifi. um, which hurts as a Canadian to say it, even though there are French flags in my background. But anyways, it
You
hurts
still have
as a
the Habs sweater.
Canadian.
It's okay.
Sorry?
You still have the Habs sweater, so it's okay.
Yeah, I still have the Habs sweater in the background. I'm wearing a Canada shirt, very big Canadian pride. My Canadian flag is in another place in my apartment, and it's much bigger than these two. But anyways, I think that this is it for Nicholas Latifi, and I think that it was basically announced by Jos Capito a few weeks ago when he said, like, we don't need to hire paid drivers anymore. I mean, he didn't say that word for word, but he basically said we don't need to hire paid drivers anymore. And I don't think that Nicholas Latifi has shown enough over the course of his career that is going to that he's gonna manage to keep his contract. That's the way that I see it. I think that 2022 is going to be the last season for Nicholas Latifi in Formula One, and I think that it means that Lance is going to be the only Canadian next year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I also have Nicholas Latifi as I put him as my honorable mention. We said that we would have some honorable mentions at the end. I actually put him as my honorable mention because I do think that paid drivers run the sport. And I think that he, despite what Jos Capito might have been claiming, I think that their extra money doesn't hurt for a team. And if Nicholas Latifi is not horrible, which he might be, he's not absolutely completely off the pace. If we don't see more than a second difference between Alex Albon, then maybe he will stay. But I think that it's more likely that he will leave than unlikely that he will leave. That is my take, and I 100% see where you're coming from. You are not wrong. Yeah, I think that he is. I put him as my honorable mention, and I have a really hot take for my second one.
So then, who's your second out?
Okay, a lot of people are not going to like me for this. So whoever is listening, I apologize to all of the Australians out there. We have lots of maybe a lot of Australian people listening.
Jordan, you're not the only person making that hot take.
I think that Daniel Ricciardo is not going to be in Formula One next year.
I think so too. That's my second out.
Yeah, I really think that Daniel Ricciardo will not be in Formula One next year. He has been dealt, ever since he left Red Bull, I should say, he has bounced around. He went to Renault and now he's at McLaren. And like we said, last year throughout the course of race reviews in our podcast, I kept emphasizing the fact that when you switch teams, there's a big learning curve. And ever since you mentioned it last podcast where you started listening to Beyond the Grid, the F1 podcast, I started listening to it, and I just listened to the most recent Carlos Sainz interview that was done right before this season.
I loved it. It was a great interview.
It was great. And he was talking about the change from Renault to McLaren and how he didn't have to, but how he helped Ricciardo make a similar change because he also went from Renault to McLaren, and how Carlos Sainz was emphasizing how different those cars are. And maybe Carlos Sainz had an easier time adapting, but based off of Daniel Ricciardo's bad luck, given that he had COVID throughout testing and that he qualified in, didn't get out of Q3 in Bahrain.
He won.
Yeah, he might not, if this tendency continues, he might be looked at in a negative light in the F1 eyes. Yes, he's an 8-time race winner, but the narrative around him might be more negative than positive because, as Christian Horner loves to say, in this sport, you're only as good as your last race. And right now, his last race wasn't too hot.
Yeah, we're recording this right after the 2022 Bahrain Grand Prix, where Ricciardo finished not dead last, but very close to dead last.
He was in the bottom 5. I don't have the results in front of me.
Yeah, I don't have the results in front of me either. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think over the last 2 years, and certainly since we've started talking about this podcast, we've talked about Ricciardo's struggles more than Ricciardo's accomplishments. And I think that that's a sign that Sure, he's a social media icon, an absolute legend on the grid, but the racecraft isn't there, and it hasn't been there since he left Red Bull. I mean, talk about the podiums, talk about the win, but how much of the win in Monza was his own doing? That's what we need to consider. So I think that this is also it for Ricardo.
Yeah, and that's a great point you bring up. How much of the win in Monza was his own doing? Because we keep forgetting Ricardo had a win, but it was also a McLaren one too. Norris was up there with him. He had pace, and McLaren was the fastest car all weekend. Maybe it would have been Mercedes had there would have been a crash or Bottas's penalty. But aside from Mercedes, they seemed like the fastest car all weekend. So again, how much was it his own doing? That is up for debate, and it is not very good to have it up for debate when you were a race winner.
Yeah, I don't think that it should be up for debate anyways. I mean, that was probably, it's not like it was one of the craziest crashes of the season. But even then, we had so many crashes last season between Hamilton and Verstappen and just in general that it was crazy. I mean,
Yeah, and we also forget that Ricardo was first off the line in that race. At the end of lap one, he was in first position, so
yeah,
he was leading the entire race. So I think that we kind of forget that with that whole crash. But again, how much of that was McLaren's doing and not his?
exactly.
That is the because he has more negatives and positives. That is the taste that is left in the mouth of Formula One fans, and that's not a good taste to have.
I don't think it's a good taste to have either. I don't have any honorable mentions for out. So, do you have any other honorable mentions for out, or is it just Latifi?
No, I just have Latifi there just because he is the one paid driver that hasn't really, we could also, with the last year make the argument for Lance, but he is the one paid driver that has consistently not performed as well as his teammates. So I think that he he uh, he might be on his way out. It might be his last season in Formula One, and I wouldn't be surprised. There are very, very, very talented Mercedes and Williams Academy drivers that are coming up in F2 that I can't wait to talk about. That could take a spot. So let's just get into it. This is my
Yeah.
favorite part of this podcast. I don't like talking about negative things. We only like talking about positive things here at the JJF1 podcast. So Jonah, let's kick it off. We love talking about the future. Who is coming up in F2? Who is coming up in the single seaters? Who is next in Formula One?
Well, you know who I think is next. Um, I think that this is going to be an amazing opportunity for Williams and for Formula One in general. With if and this goes along with my Nicholas Latifi out prediction, even though like they're not linked at all, this Latifi leaving and this person coming in, but I think that Jamie Chadwick is going to come into F1.
Very hot take.
Yeah. But look, it isn't like it is because she has smashed it in every single thing that she's done. Not only in W series, and she is the only champion of W series. Let that stand, okay? She's also done Extreme E, and even in Extreme E, when she was partnered with, no, sorry, it wasn't Extreme E. It was the Ride of Champions, where she was partnered up with Jensen Button. They both did well. So you know what? I think that Jamie Chadwick, regardless of the gender, she is an amazing talent, and that she deserves to be in F1.
I will not disagree with you on the basis that she is an amazing talent. I think she is an amazing talent just based on her racecraft and her accolades on their own. I think she is an amazing talent. But I don't think she'll be the fifth woman in F1. I think that she is just a little off from the F2 drivers that we currently have. I think that it's not a knock on Jamie Chadwick. I think that it's just that we have better drivers coming up the ranks in F2. She deserves to be in F1, but I don't think she'll quite make it there. I think that it's amazing to have more diversity in the sport. I think that would be fantastic, and I push for that all the time. But I don't think that it will be her to break that boundary. I think there are just, I don't think, again, it's not a knock on her. I think there are just better drivers in F2 coming up. And not only in F2, but I'll get to later, but in other sports that, in other racing series that also deserve a seat. And I guess I'll go and say who I think should be in F1. And this goes with my Hamilton being out. I think that Nick De Vries deserves a seat in F1 badly. He deserves a seat in F1 last year. That's how bad.
That's very true. He is due for an F1 seat.
He is due for an F1 seat. And, you can make the argument that he could take Latifi's seat. He could take even Albon's seat, or he could take Hamilton's seat if he chooses to retire. He is that good. Formula 2 champion, Formula E champion, has been with the Mercedes team for, I think, 2 or 3 years now, is under the management of Toto Wolff, who is a third of the shareholder and team principal of the Mercedes AMG F1 team.
The first ever Formula E world champion.
Exactly. And I think that he is long overdue for a Formula One seat. And I think that it should be either at Mercedes or at a Mercedes engine team like Williams to maybe get his feet wet there. But I think that he is long overdue for a Formula One seat. It is out of question. He needs to be in F1, and he needs to be in F1 yesterday.
You know what? I 100% agree with you. And the thing is that what's really disappointing in general is that we don't really have a lot of opportunities, or at least accessible opportunities, to watch Nick De Vries race. We could have seen him in Montreal if Montreal kept the Formula E race, but that's a story in of itself. But Nick De Vries, just on his accomplishments, should definitely be in Formula One. And going on that vibe, there's another person that I think should be in Formula One on that basis, but I put him in my honorable mentions because I have another hot take that I want to talk about. But Nick De Vries is a very, very good pick. What would be really funny is if Stoffel Van Dorn gets that drive over Nick De Vries, even though Stoffel Van Dorn has already been in F1. That would be extremely funny. But anyways.
I think he's very happy at the Formula One broadcast team.
Doesn't he also drive in Formula E?
He might, but I know that he did a couple races last year with the broadcast team.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyways.
Oh, sorry. He did the French. He's on the French broadcast team. He's not with Sky Sports. He's with the France broadcast team. And I know that because I have F1 TV Pro and I watch some of the races in French.
I do not, because I like David Croft.
He did a couple races last year with the French broadcast team.
Well, I'm happy that you're talking about the French, because behind me is a French flag and a European Union flag. And there is going to be, maybe not this year, but eventually, within 1 to 2 years, there's going to be a new French driver in Formula One, the man who I saw this morning, win the feature race in F2. His name is Théo Pourchaire, and I think that he's going to make a drive into Formula One. I mean, he's a kid. Let's be real. I don't know how old he is, but he's a kid. I think he's younger than us. He's very, very young, and he has so much potential. And he already has 3 wins in Formula 2. And I remember watching his first win in Monaco because it was the same weekend where Roy Nissany got his first podium in Formula 2. So I remember associating both of them. And it was at that time, he was the youngest F2 race winner ever. And if that's not proof that he should be in Formula One, maybe not now, but soon, he should definitely be in.
I cannot argue with that. I actually put him as my honorable mention. on my little napkin right here.
I see Bullshot written on a napkin.
Yeah, he's on my honorable mention just because I watched the F2 race yesterday and I thought it was amazing because not only did he qualify first, but it was an inverse grid and he still won.
Yeah.
So I think that in and of itself is just shows that he not only can put a lap together, but could also overtake and put laps together to win races. And I think that he definitely will be in F1. Not next year. Maybe he'll get another year of Formula 2 under his belt.
Unless he wins F2.
Yeah, unless he wins F2, which is possible. But there's also a lot of very talented F2 drivers that are very hungry as well. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think he will eventually make it into F1. But I think my second one is, I thought it was more obvious, my second one. And I'm very surprised you didn't speak of him. And I don't know if you forgot him. I think you forgot him actually, because it's crazy how he's on Formula 1 this year. And that's Oscar Piastri.
Oscar Piastri was the honorable mention that I put to the side because I wanted to talk about Porsche.
Yeah. If I was Otmar Zafnauer at the time, Laurent Rossi, I would have said El Plan is finito, and I would have given Oscar Piastri the drive over Alonso. You want a young driver to get into those new generation cars. You want an F2 champion who is very talented to get into these F2 generation cars. I would have put him into F1 this year, but that didn't happen. But I do think that we saw something very interesting in the preseason. We saw a report come out that said, oh, if one of McLaren's drivers tests positive for COVID-19, Oscar Piastri could replace them and run a race with McLaren. To me, that's like got me thinking a bit. Maybe he could be in the McLaren seat
if
next
Ricardo's
year.
out.
So exactly, my logic is out with Ricardo, in with Piastri. I think that they can make that move. I think that a young driver has worked out well for them in the past with Lando Norris. And I think that Piastri would do that car really well. I think that he is great for Formula 1. He deserves to be in Formula 1. And I think he'll eventually make it to Formula 1. And I think he should have been in Formula 1 yesterday, like Nick De Vries.
I agree. I
thought it was more obvious. I really thought it was obvious.
No, because the thing is that I wanted to talk about Porsche before I wanted to talk about Piastri, because I don't know, I get a good vibe around Théo Porsche. I don't know why.
So do I. He is very talented.
But Piastri, the best thing that I heard was after he won F2 last year, he did an interview. And the question they asked him was, hey, you're F2, you were F3 champion last year, F2 champion this year. What do you think is next? And he's like, well, I have a reserve drive for Alpine, so hopefully I'll be world champion of sitting on my couch and playing video games. So yeah, I mean, it's super impressive that he won F3 in 1 year and then won F2 the year after. I remember I don't forget who the second person was, but he's one of two people to ever do that. I think the other person might have been it was either George Russell or Charles Leclerc, not 100% sure, but it was one of them. So if that gives you an idea of how Oscar Piastri doesn't even need time to get used to a new series because he'll just win, he should be in.
Yeah, he should be in. He is an amazing talent. I'm surprised he's not in. I'm surprised that a lot of these teams are, allowing these older guys, but the veterans coming back for second stints and people who already had time in F1, that some which are deserving to come back, but some which are not. And Alonso, he is a two-time world champion.
I was gonna say
not to knock him and say that he's not a talented driver. He is. He had a very nice showing in qualifying with Alpine this weekend. But I do think that it's time for the younger generation to come in. And I really hope that the new team principal at Alpine, Otmar Zafnauer, very weird to say that, will we'll see that and we'll give him a drive for next year. Or maybe Zach Brown asks himself some questions when it comes to Ricardo and asks himself and takes a look a long look at the data and says, is it time?
Mhm. I mean,
And again, a
I
reminder, Ricardo's deal ends this year. We have to take into consideration these contract situations where Ricardo's deal was a 2-year deal. He had a 2-year deal at Renault, he had a 2-year deal at McLaren. It comes into, it's terminated at the end of this year. So maybe no contract lined up for next year. The seat is free. We know Lando Norris has a long-term deal. Maybe Piastri gets the drive in McLaren.
Yeah, I like your very subtle knock, or your very subtle indication of at I guess Alonso, Vettel, and Magnussen. So either the old people or the comebacks. Even though I mean we generally like those people, like you said, it's time for the new generation to come in, and it's time for the veterans to leave their place. And I mean, that could also mean that there's going to be a lot more turnaround over the next few years in Formula One because of all this young talent and 20 spots on the grid.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see. Now I had in my little napkin here, I wrote down another name that I wanted to bring up because I'm not sure if he's out or if he's going to stay in F1. And I wanted to bring this up because people who are listening to this know we're both Aston Martin fans. And we love ourselves some Sebastian Vettel. He is a great human being off the grid. He's part of a lot of social initiatives that do a lot of good for the world and stands up for all the right causes. But we know that Sebastian Vettel is past his prime. Yeah. And we know that Sebastian Vettel is not getting any younger. So, Jonah, I wanted to ask you, as an honorable mention, maybe for this topic, what are you thinking of Sebastian Vettel recently, especially with how Aston Martin seemed to be on especially with Aston Martin's what it looks like their trajectory will be for this upcoming season?
I don't know. I think that he'll stay 1 to 2 more, like this season, at least, and at most next season.
It's very hard to say. And then who comes next in that Aston Martin seat? Are they going to go for more of a veteran, or are they going to go for a young guy?
They could go for De Vries because it is a Mercedes-powered engine.
That's what I was trying to get at. Maybe next year is De Vries' year at Aston Martin, but who knows?
De Vries and Stroll would be a crazy lineup.
We're just shooting out ideas here.
De Vries and Stroll would be a very good lineup, eh?
Yeah, it would be. But it would be even better if they had a car that raced.
Oh. Oh man, it's difficult to be an Aston Martin fan sometimes.
Yeah, it is. We were doing really well in 2020.
Yeah, we were very hyped in 2020. And what a time it's been since then. I have an honorable mention for and that's Liam Lawson. Let's not forget that he won in F2 on debut. And he has shown in F2 that he could definitely push cars. And I think that he's an honorable mention and not necessarily a guaranteed in, because he's in this thing called the Red Bull Junior Academy. And the Red Bull Junior Academy is just Helmut Marko throwing a dart at a graph and saying, oh, who should I hire this year? Throws a dart. Okay, it's going to be Alex Albon. Okay, it's going to be Pierre Gasly. Okay, it's going to be Liam Lawson. It's going to be Jehan Daruvala. It's going to be Yuki Tsunoda. That's who it's going to be this year.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting because Red Bull does have 4 seats in Formula One, but they have 3 of those seats that are, as long as those drivers want those seats, they have those seats. Verstappen is not going
Who's not going to get the seat? Sergio Perez?
No, I think it's Yuki Tsunoda. I think that Verstappen is not going anywhere. I think Perez has the seat as long as he wants it because he has proven that he is the ultimate teammate and is the ultimate right-hand man in their pursuit of the constructors and world championship for Max Verstappen. And Pierre Gasly is Pierre Gasly. He is arguably top 3 on the grid in terms of pure driver skill. And Pierre Gasly is Pierre Gasly. I think there's nothing more to say about that. He's an amazing Formula One driver that deserves to be in Formula One for as long as he wants. And I think the only the only touchable human driver in an AlphaTauri seat is Yuki Tsunoda. So they have one seat that they could play with, but they have a lot of talent coming up in F2. There are lots of Red Bull liveries on that grid this year.
I think it's like half the grid at this point.
Daruvula, Lawson,
Vips.
Yuri Vips. They had a new driver coming in from Asia. I think he's Japanese, but I'm not sure. Sato, I believe his name is. If he's a Red Bull driver, I might be mistaken. Regardless, they have a lot of talent coming up. They have like clearly 4 people that are vying for one seat in AlphaTauri. Yeah. So I think that that's the only reason why it would be an honorable mention, because there is no clear path for their talent to be in F1. You know, maybe one day Checo says, I have 2 kids. I want to spend more time with my wife, Carola.
I want to go back to Guadalajara.
I want to go back to Guadalajara. I want to go back to Mexico. It's summer all year round in Mexico. Why not? If Checo says that it's time, maybe that's a reason why. But then again, I would think that Gasly deserves that seat more than anybody anyway. So then you'd have 2 seats in AlphaTauri. So we'll see. I think that they just have too much supply and too little demand.
Yeah.
Basic economics check out there.
Welcome to the world of Formula One, where there's so much talent and there's 20 seats at the top.
Exactly.
Do you have anything else before we wrap up?
I think this was a great podcast.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. So if you want to hear us talk more about the future of F1 and the rest of the 2022 season, feel free to like our Facebook page and follow us on Instagram at the JJF1 podcast. And we will see you for the next episode. See ya.